Welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you, episode 299. Is that it? 299? Also with all the daily Daves and everything else. Episode 299, we have a lot of episodes here. And if it's your first time here on the podcast with us, welcome. This is the How to Podcast series. My name is Dave. I live in Ontario, Canada, near a really big hill with lots of water called Niagara Falls. You should come and check it out sometime. I love podcasting. I have 8 different shows. This is one of my 8. And I get to talk to some of the greatest people in the world. And I have some of the best listeners in the world, including you. If it's your first time here, welcome to the club. Nice to have you here. What do we do here? We talk podcasting. And there's a lot of podcasts about podcasting. Granted, I know that. I listen to most of them. And the one thing that I find that we do different here is that it's not a single voice in podcasting tell you how you should, and for some reason, how you shouldn't podcast. I don't really understand that. That's kind of called the gatekeeper, and the beauty of podcasting is there's no gatekeepers. So anybody that stands up and says, "You can't podcast like that, how dare you?" I don't understand why those people are here. You can podcast however you want. I'm here to help you on your journey. There's always ways that we can improve, but starting is really simple. And we need more of you in podcasting. So if you're thinking about a show and you're like, I don't know if I can do this, you're in the right spot. There's a lot of great people here who would love to share their expertise with you. People way smarter than I am have come on this show, and I'm so glad they're here, and I'm glad you're here as well. What I want to talk about today is 3 things we hear a lot about in our environmental prospects around the world and how we can relate all that to podcasting. We've heard this possibly before, that we should reduce, reuse, and recycle. Really important for us. My wife and I have a little small business. We call it Upcycle Canada. You can check out the Upcycle Canada podcast if you want to hear my gorgeous wife, Jen, and myself talk about podcasting and talking about upcycling and repurposing things. We have a show that we've done together for a long time, and it's there in the world if you want to check it out. The Upcycle Canada podcast. If you want to hear my gorgeous wife, she's fabulous, and I love her. So we talk about upcycling, which is repurposing, giving new life to old products that people don't want. You take a piano and you turn it into a shelf. You take this and turn it into that. And what we're trying to do is divert usable items from the landfill. Really important for us. Our business has been around for 10 years. We love it. We love the great people we work with, and we've had some amazing encounters with people around the world. That's the Upcycle Canada podcast. But I'm like, how can we take that concept and relate it to podcasting around reducing, reusing, and recycling when it comes to our podcast? And you're like, oh, this is going to be interesting. I think so too. Let's unpack this together. Again, welcome to the show. My wife and I were out at a conference and at the hotel room. They have their commercials and stuff that play, whatever. And one thing that was a different commercial that we've never seen before, because we were in a different place, a different province, they had what they call trash talk. So somebody was throwing away like a used water bottle or a drinking box or a can, and the item stayed on top of the garbage can and then started yelling back at the person that was trying to throw them away that you should be recycling. You should be doing something better than just tossing it in the garbage, which you probably might have done in the past. I know I did. Back when I was young, there was no such thing as recycling. Everything went in the garbage. Have as many garbage bags as you want. Didn't matter. Things are different now because we're smarter, right? We know that we can recycle this stuff and better for our planet. We've progressed. We have a long way to go, but we've gotten better. And the whole concept about recycling is that you're not just having something that you put out into the world consumed and then thrown away, but there's a new use for this. There's a repurposing that can happen. And in podcasting, I think we come to the mic, we record an episode, we put it out in the world, and then we never think about it again. I'm like, what if we could reduce, reuse, and recycle our podcast? Interesting, right? Is there something that we can do in our podcast to help the longevity of our podcast, to help our podcast be different, to grow so that it have legs? And then what can we do with this content beyond releasing an episode and not really knowing what's going to happen with it after the fact? I want to jump into that today, and we're going to break down how we can reuse our podcast, how we can reduce our podcast, and how we recycle our podcast here on the show. Let's start off actually at the beginning here with how to reduce our podcast. Interesting. Reducing our podcast. What can we do? When we create a podcast and we put it out into the world, my challenge to you is the podcast length of the show. Is it compact? Is it fluff free? Is it the information that people are looking for? And can we trim it at all? Can we do some editing? Can we bring it down to a more sizable chunk that doesn't go on tangents, doesn't lead audiences to nowhere, but leads people to a spot where you get to the point where you want to get to in the best time possible? When we were out at this podcasting conference, we would take walks trying to find a coffee shop at 3 p.m. Calgary, for some reason, shuts down at 3 p.m. We were trying to find just a cup of coffee at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We were having a hard time. We were walking up and down streets and asking people. People were pointing us to places that were closed. We were not having a great experience, and it took a long time to find something. If somebody could give us the result faster and send us in the right direction, we could have saved time. And I think in podcasting, we're not really concerned about saving our listener time. And we go on tangents. And I listen to shows where there's really no point to what they just talked about for the last 5 minutes. And they could have just cut that out and given us back the gift of time. That's the one thing that even if people aren't donating to your show monetarily and giving you money, they're donating their time. And time is something that's not something that's available to everyone, and we only have a limited amount of it. So anytime you can trim up your show and give back by reducing the amount of podcast length of the show, I think is something that we can do be more conscious of and do better at, is how can we chop this down to just the bare things that are going to serve our audience and be the best of the best. Okay? Maybe cutting out some of those tangents might be a good idea. So why do we reduce? We respect our listeners' time. We want to have better improved engagement and retention rates. What is that? When people listen to your show, how far do they listen before they leave? Are they listening to the first 1 or 2 minutes? Congratulations. That counts as a listen. You've just gained some analytics and some, credit for the fact that somebody listened to a podcast. Awesome. But they listened to everything? No, they bounced after a minute and a half, 2 minutes. They have no idea what you talked about, but you got a credit for the listen. So congrats. If we can watch the engagement play that happens, you can do that on Apple when you sign in through Apple, their dashboard directly for the Apple platform. You can also see it in your Spotify for Podcasters platform for Spotify. You can see episode to episode how long people listen to your show. And if you're noticing that people drop off after a certain point, either your podcast is too long, the content's maybe too boring, or you've lost them in tangents, and people just bounce, they leave, they're like, meh, I'm done, and they're gone. If you can tighten that up and reduce the amount of people leaving your show and reduce the length of the show to being more concise and more to the point, you'll have better retention rates, meaning people press play and they stay to the end. That's what you want. You want to have a good retention rate. So by reducing some of that fluff that makes people leave could increase the length of time that people listen to your show, which is a better retention rate overall. And as we reduce the amount of fluff in our podcast and stuff that doesn't relate to the topic, it gives a higher quality content experience to our listeners. So how do we reduce effectively? Start with a clear outline. I'm using an outline right now. I'm going to cut and paste my outline into the show notes so you can kind of follow along. Cut any unnecessary tangents and repetitions. Anything that's kind of like, doesn't need to be there, take it out. Use tighter editing techniques and practice concise storytelling. Get to the point of your story in a timely fashion. And some tips to identify what to cut. When you're listening back to your episode as you're doing your editing or asking someone to edit for you, podcasteditingandsupport.com is my website. Ask, does this serve the main point of the conversation or the question or the topic or my guest? Also, get feedback from test listeners. I have my hand up. If you want me to test listen to your show and give you feedback, I'd love to do that. And then also, again, go back to your Apple and Spotify dashboards and track the audience engagement metrics. So we've talked about reducing the people that leave your show or the episode length or reducing the content with all the fluff. What about reusing your content as a three-pronged approach to giving your podcast longevity? What about reusing? We go through all the process of recording and getting a podcast out there, but we've never really thought about how to reuse the content in different ways and giving the content more life beyond just the recorded episode that goes out to the world. What are some of the benefits of reusing your content? By reusing your content, it reaches different audience segments, maybe through social media, through YouTube, through shorts, through Instagram posts, Facebook posts, LinkedIn posts. We're giving the chance for our content to be found in different places beyond the podcast itself. It also increases the content output efficiency. You've done all this work. You've released an episode and then you never refer to it. It'd be great if you could take the ideas, the big concepts, and repurpose them into a newsletter, a blog, a communication with your audience beyond the podcast episode itself. It also reinforces key messages across different platforms. Not everyone is a podcast listener, but you can take a key concept from your podcast and release it to the world in a way that can draw people to your podcast or can just be a standalone piece of content that benefits the consumer on the platform that you're trying to use to reach an audience. It doesn't have to always draw people back to your podcast. It could be something that's standalone. How do we reuse our content then from our podcast? Again, you can use blog posts, episode transcripts. You can extract quotes and use them on social media. Develop infographics from key points. You can do all kinds of things on Canva. You can use audio clips or video clips as a short on YouTube or on an Instagram post. You can create little video snippets. If you don't want to be on video, you can use Canva and use stock video. Also, I use story blocks for video content. And you can get B-roll that talks about the topic you're talking about, put up the B-roll, add the audio to it, and you're done. You don't even have to be on camera. What are some of the best practices for reusing content? The biggest thing is to tailor the content to the platform. Something that works really well on YouTube might not necessarily translate to LinkedIn, and vice versa. Something that works great on Instagram might not work well for your Facebook audience. TikTok might be great, but maybe not great for Instagram. Each of these platforms are unique for a reason, and they have different ways of communicating and being active on their platforms. You're going to have to do a little legwork to figure out what works best for each platform, but to do one piece of content and blast it across multiple platforms really doesn't work that well because it's just a copy-paste and you're not being true to the platform you're posting to. So do some investigation. But the big thing in all of this is to maintain a consistent branding experience so people know it's you if they're on multiple platforms. Same look, same feel, same colors, same sounds, same approach, just tailored to that specific platform. And in all of this, be sure to add value with each reuse of your content. Additional context, visuals behind the scenes, things that complement what you're doing for your podcast, but they're consistent with the platform you're posting to. So we've talked about reducing your podcast. We've talked about reusing your podcast. But what about recycling your podcast? When we recycle our podcast, we're breathing new life into old content. Now, I've got hundreds and hundreds of episodes across multiple podcasts. And again, this is something I need to work on, is how I can recycle past content and bring it back to life. Because it's got legs. It's still great. It's still topical. It's still got meaning, even though it's been released years ago. there's still meaning to conversations and content and things that have been put out into the world that maybe a new listener has zero context of and has no idea that I've talked about these things in the past or shared that interview or talked about that book. Bringing these things back and reusing and recycling our content is a great way to add life to our show. So why should we recycle our podcast content? Number one, for those that have evergreen content, meaning there's no expiry date to what we talk about in our show, our topics remain relevant way into the future. New listeners may not even have heard our older episodes, so they have no idea, and they may never go back to episode 1. Some do. I do. When I find a podcast I love, I go right back to the beginning because I want to hear it all. But some people won't do that. That's not how they're wired. They're going to start and continue from here if they love your show. They may never listen to your old episodes, so they don't know what you've talked about. And perspectives, informations, they can evolve over time. You may believe one thing 100 episodes, and today you might think of it differently. So referencing back to old content and bringing that back into the context of what you're talking about today is a great way to send people back into your past episodes so they can go back in time and listen. Perspectives may change, and you might change as a person. You most likely will over time. So what are some strategies for recycling your content? Maybe a best of, where you bring in elements of past episodes. What about updating an old episode with new information? In your hosting site, for the hosting sites that I'm using, there's an option to replace the audio. Now, I'm not uploading and I'm not deleting the original post, the original episode from 200 episodes ago, but I'm going in and replacing the audio with a new audio track. I still have all my listeners attached to that episode. I'm not losing that. I'm not breaking the connection. And I'm just updating the information that maybe something's changed. Maybe the website that I was pointing you to 200 episodes ago, they're not there anymore. They don't do what they do anymore. So why send you to a broken link? Maybe go in there and refresh the content and just let them know, hey, the concepts of what we talked about in this episode are really good. They're still viable today, but this link doesn't work anymore. So I just wanted to give you an update to that. And I'm going to remove it out of the show notes, but the content's still great. Listen to what we talk about in this episode. And then fix up the episode, repost it, and replace the audio, the original audio with the updated audio track. Everything stays the same. You're not breaking the connection with your listener. And you get all the stats stay in place. It's one way to stay up to date and recycle the content. What about revisiting past topics with a fresh new angle, new insight, new thoughts? There's been a change. You're different. What about developing a series or a theme based around popular past episodes? So maybe you've had 10 guests on in the past and they've all talked about business growth. What if you combine them all in together and do an episode where you bring out highlights of each of the 10 guests and do an episode about their 10 thoughts, bringing snippets and then having links in your show notes to go back and listen to the full episode from these 10 guests? Why not? You've had 10 authors on who write children's books. Take little snippets of each of their interview, put them together in one episode, links to your back episodes so they can go back and listen to authors who've written about children's books. That's a great way to send people back into your categories and give them something viable for valuable content in that episode where you bring in the clips. Excellent idea. And that'll send people back into your content from the past. You can also use past content as a springboard for new discussions. So 100 episodes ago, I talked about this. That led me to believe that I want to talk about this in my newest episode. They can always be a way to reiterate, bring back things that you've done in the past and give new life to past content. Some tips for effective recycling. Acknowledge when you're revisiting a topic so your audience knows that you've already talked about this. Make sure you include a link to that episode, again, so they can go back and listen. That sends people back in your catalog. It's great advice. As well, highlight what's new or different from what's been done in the past. And connect past content to current trends or events. So you talked about something in the past. Maybe you did an episode around Father's Day, and Father's Day is coming up this year. You can send them back to what you talked about 5 years ago and send them a link. Give them a link so they can go back in time. And as Father's Day becomes something that's popular up to Father's Day, then it's a great opportunity to bring back content. So the whole idea about reducing, reusing, and recycling your content is just a framework for you to think about how you can send people back into the past, things you've done before, to bring them back into your content. It's one thing when somebody shows up today and hits play for the first time, but if you have 200 episodes in the past, you want to send them back in a meaningful way into what you've done in the past. These are strategies that you can implement today, right now. And what I would suggest for you as you send people back into your catalog is to invite your listener to give you feedback or ask questions about things you've done in the past. You've worked hard on your podcast. You've done a lot of work to get to this point. You put a lot of work into your episodes. You're proud of what you've done. But to create an episode, put it out into the world, and then never refer to it again would be the same as an author writing a book and then not telling anybody about it, putting it on the shelf and moving on to the next thing. How is that book going to find readers? How is that book going to land in the lap of somebody if they don't even know about it? As authors, we promote our books. As podcasters, we promote our podcasts. As singers and songwriters, we promote our songs. We do interviews about them. We talk about them. We tell people what we've done. And we go back in time and say, hey, here's a best of. You see that all the time in music. We want to bring our audience back into what we've done in the past so that they get a well-rounded picture of who we are. This structure of reducing, reusing, and recycling framework, as it applies to podcasting, will help you to keep an overall episode that's manageable and brings people back into what you've done in the past. You want to make sure that you create something that sends people back into your catalog so that they get more of you. Having somebody come to your show and press play is great, but it's keeping that person in your world that's really important. So if you've come here and this is your first time, there's a lot of episodes that you can scroll through. We've tried to make the titles of each episode something that's relatable to you. So you can go through and go, yeah, that sounds interesting. That's not so interesting to me. And then you can listen through. And we've done a lot of things here as far as Daily Daves. We've had guest co-hosts on the show. We have these solo episodes as well to give you a variety of different things that we've talked about. We have Question of the Month. We have spotlights on different podcasters. There's a variety of things for you to choose from. Some you're going to like, some you're going to pass on. And that's fine with me because I want to connect with you in multiple ways and with multiple people. So that's why we're doing what we do here. So I want you to be very conscious of how you can reduce, reuse, and recycle your content. And I'd love to hear what you're going to do that on your show. And reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Let me know how you're going to take these concepts of reducing, reusing, and recycling and what you're doing for your show. I'd love to celebrate that and share with others about your show. You can always reach me at howtopodcast.ca. There's my SpeakPipe. There's all my links there. And I'd love to connect with you around podcasting. Thanks for listening to the show. Excited to hear how you're going to recycle your content and how you're going to get your people into your show to enjoy it even more. Thanks for listening to the show. Take care. So you're a podcaster and you podcast alone. You are in your home, you're in your studio, you're in your closet, and you podcast. And you put everything out there in the world and you're thinking, man, I'd love to meet another podcaster and not feel so alone. I wish there was a way to meet up with other podcasters and talk about my journey, ask my questions in a safe place where others there are also podcasters at different levels. Some people have been doing this a long time. Maybe some podcasters are brand new like me. And I'd love to be able to ask questions and do community with others. Maybe find a guest for my show or be a guest and ask a question that's bothering me about podcasting that I haven't seen or already got an answer to. I wish there was a group for me. Dave, do you know of a group where they do all of that and they do group hugs, virtual group hugs? Yeah, we do. It's our meetup. And you know, guess what? You're invited to come to our meetups. They are amazing, not because of me by any stretch of imagination. It's because they're great because of the people who show up. You're going to meet some of the nicest podcasters you've ever met. There's no judgment. There's no talking down to you. It's not about me. It's about the group. And there's many times where I don't even have to talk. Each of the people coming bring great expertise and insights that can help you grow your show, to help you be a better person. And they're there to support you. It's our meetups, and you can find them at our howtopodcast.ca website. Come join us. There's over 200 people in our group, and we'd love to have you there. Lots of room for you. Come be a part of our meetups and meet other podcasters. Don't do it alone. Podcasting should never be done alone. Come join us. howtopodcast.ca. See you at our meetups.